Hi, and welcome. I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, Presbyterian minister of 3 congregations in Eastern Ontario, and I'm also the questioning pastor. In the question I asked about why did God make Jesus Jewish, I happened to mention the flood. So I thought I'd do something about the flood. Did it happen? Was it worldwide? And have we found the ark? And was Noah and his family the only ones saved? And what if we can't find evidence? Does that mean the story's wrong? Okay, so let's begin with the evidence for world flood. We don't really have evidence that there was a worldwide flood. That means that it covered the whole world at the same time. Now, Immanuel Velikovsky, in his book Worlds in Collision, and other authors have, posited, have guessed. What they've done is they've looked around and they've seen all these records or traces or stories, myths of world floods in all sorts of cultures, Mesopotamian, Indian, Chinese, and some of the indigenous peoples. And they've said, look at this. This is the evidence we need that there's a world flood. There's been a world flood. They all have stories about a world flood. Well, that's true. Many of these cultures do have stories about a world flood. Did that mean were they all referring to the same world flood? Did they just assume it was a world flood because it was a major flood in their area? How do they know it was a world flood? I mean, all these questions should be asked. And certainly for Velikovsky, and I happen to love Velikovsky's stuff. I love some of this sort of beyond the normal range of thinking. But while I find Velikovsky exciting and I love everything that seems to prove he was right, or he had some right ideas, or he was at least asking the right questions, I also look for evidence. I want something more real. And the biggest problem I have with Velikovsky and the flood stories is, how do I know that the flood story in India, which involved Manu, how do I know that that flood story and the Bible flood story refer to the same flood? We don't have dates. And what about the floods in China or in among the indigenous people? I'm not sure now whether it was the Haida or whatever. And how do we know it's the same flood? And that's the biggest problem, is you may have these stories from around the world, but are they referring to the same flood? For that matter, when did the flood, Noah's flood, occur? We don't know. We think we know when the Exodus happened, but we're not sure. And we can go back from the Exodus time to maybe Abraham is around, maybe 2000, maybe a bit less. We're not quite sure. So then the floods, what, 2500, 3000 BC? So that's 5,000 years ago. 3000 BC and we're 2000 AD. That's 5,000 years. How do we know that all these little flood accounts go back that far? So that's one problem we have. Some people say that they found the ark. I wish we had. And maybe they're right. Maybe they have found traces. For myself, I go, I'd like to know any tree, any piece of wood that is still around after 5,000 years. Maybe it's been treated to withstand water, but what about ice? What about winter? What about heat? What about earthquakes? I just have a lot of trouble believing that there's wooden elements that can last that long and be found. Well, I think sometimes they might say there's traces of them or evidence of them left behind in the rocks. Maybe. I really don't know much about it. I haven't been that, frankly, I haven't been that interested in the remnants. I have a very hefty dose of skepticism. Were Noah and his family the only ones to be saved? If there were a world flood, doesn't make sense for only one family to have been saved with the animals. And the answer for me is no. I have no trouble with other stories saying, you know, these people were saved or that family was saved. Why not? Well, why aren't those families mentioned in the Bible? Well, the Bible is recording the story of the people who eventually came to be known as the Jews. It's God working with the Jews and in the Jews. So yeah, there could be people in India or China or North America who have been saved in their floods. But they're not Jews. They're not part of God's plan of saving the world through Jews, through Christians. Who knows? Maybe even through Muslims. We don't know. But we know that God decided to work through one group of people. And so that's where the focus of the Bible is on the Jews, is on that Jewish family. Finally, if the flood didn't happen, well, frankly, it's easier to believe that the flood did happen than didn't. But maybe it wasn't worldwide. Maybe it was a very big flood in Mesopotamia. Okay. So it's not a worldwide flood as the Bible claims. And maybe it didn't rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, in some ways it doesn't matter. The story is about why was God angry enough to destroy the world, to want to destroy the world. It has to do with being evil, turning away from God. And yet, even with God's anger, he couldn't bring himself to wipe us out completely. He wanted to save us. He wanted to keep working through us, even though we've messed up. And that is the story of the Bible. That is the gospel. That even when we mess up, even as bad as we are, as much of a failure as we have been, God still wants us. He wants to work with us. He wants to work through us. He wants to transform us. But he won't do any of that without our permission. And once we realize that's the message, then the rest of it doesn't really matter. The flood, world flood or not, finding the ark or not, isn't as important as knowing God is working, doing whatever he can, breaking into time and space in the world to reach us. And that's a pretty powerful message. So once again, I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, the questioning pastor, and thank you for joining us today. Take care, God bless, and see you next time.